but they're not overtly critical of temples where it's practiced. Certainly that's the case in Birmingham. I don't know if it's typical generally, but I think the Arya Samaj today has a slightly different demeanour, and they are very committed to the nationalist Hindu cause. But the original lines of reform established by Dayananda were based on this call to go back to the Veda. Right, let's move on to another major figure whose biography we can trace. Dayananda this is Swami Vivekananda, Narendranath Dutt, as he was born. And whereas Dayananda Saraswati is a Gujarati from the northwest of India, Swami Vivekananda is a Bengali, I think from the city of Calcutta, the son of a Calcutta lawyer. Interesting stories. His life is fascinating. He didn't live to any great age. I think he died before the age of 40 after major preaching work. Okay, we can look at Dayananda's life and work. Again, there's a comic on the subject we can read out, and his travels to the United States and Europe preaching Hindu Dharma. But in terms of the reform of Hindu society, and particularly Dayananda, unlike Dayananda, Vivekananda didn't reject Murti Puja entirely. He saw it as useful for people who needed that form of practice, and the stories which demonstrate that he did feel that Murti Puja was a reasonable thing to do for people who need it. But on issues of caste and on issues of gender, he was very emphatic again. Now, in demanding reform and upliftment for the lower classes. Let's look at Vivekananda. The Ramakrishna mission that he established is well known in India for its philanthropic activities. I went to the Ramakrishna mission in Trivandrum to visit, and it's a hospital. You go in there and it's like going into a hospital reception, and there's a sadhu sitting there checking people into hospital, because that's what they do. That's their that's their religious practice, is helping people. It's very much of a philanthropic organisation. So where does this come from? Is this again Christians telling us you should love one another, or the secular humanists? Not at all. Vivekananda is a Vedantist, and by and large a Neo-Vedantist who follows Shankaracharya. His point is that Shankaracharya and Vedanta, Advaita Vedanta, teaches the inner divinity of every living being. So each one of us is essentially a part or wholly identical with Brahman, the Absolute. Therefore, for Vivekananda, worship of God, respect for God, means service to humanity. Because if I serve you, if I lift you up, if I feed you, I am directly, actively serving God, because you are a manifestation of the divine. So very interesting talks by Swami Vivekananda. They are recorded in the complete work. Some of his lectures are absolutely fascinating. Fabulous stuff he's saying. There's one talk where I think he's addressing an assembly who seem to be high caste, and he says it's very easy for us to stand here and talk glibly about Vedanta this, Upanishads this, but then you walk out of this hall and you see a man of the lower caste and you feel contempt. You look down at him, stay away from me, don't come near me. He said, but that means you haven't understood the first word of what I've been saying about Vedanta. Because if you really understand Vedanta, you won't see a person who is lower than you. You will see a manifestation of Brahman, and you will show reverence. You will do everything you can to render service to that person. Vivekananda called this constructive Vedanta, which means that you apply the mystical theology of Shankaracharya to a context of social reform. The rational conclusion of the Vedantic idea of inner divinity is that you serve all of humanity. So there is a connection there, but it took Vivekananda really to make that connection. It wasn't entirely new. I was reading again in the Shankara Digvijay. There's a story about Shankaracharya walking down the road with his disciples, and a fellow of the very lowest caste comes in the opposite direction. So the disciples run up and say, get out the way, get out the way. The great Shankaracharya is coming, and he says, and the low caste person who's actually a manifestation of Shiva pretending to be Lavakaspa. He says, well, if you think everyone's Brahman, why are you taking this sort of attitude? You know, and Shankaracharya says, actually, this man has great spiritual knowledge. So Vivekananda's idea wasn't entirely new, but he really put it into application again. Same thing with the treatment of Hindu women. He says something like, I will not rest until I've rooted out this discrimination on the basis of gender. He says, is there any gender in the Atman? All we can say, and here he quotes Katha Upanishad, is asti, asti. It is, it is. In other words, you're seeing she is a woman, she's lower than me. But that means, again, you don't understand Vedanta, because Vedanta is, I see Brahman, manifestations of Brahman. Therefore, what he's saying is that form of discrimination, abuse of other people, is completely incompatible with the realization of absolute oneness that is inherent in the Advaita interpretation of Vedanta. So he's using, again, resources that are entirely Hindu in order to demand the reform of Hindu society and social welfare work on behalf of those who are disadvantaged. Vivekananda's writings are well worth reading. A wonderful speaker as well. Anyway, we haven't got time to spend too much time on Vivekananda. But it's worth reading, for example, the newspaper accounts of Vivekananda's speech in Chicago in the 1890s, where an American newspaper journalist compares him to Christ and says how fortunate we are to be in the presence of this man. So a very charismatic figure. But again, it's very interesting how he uses Vedanta to as the basis for his call for the reform of Hindu society. And finally, we must, before we finish, mention Mahatma Gandhi, Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi, who is still regarded as the founder of the modern state of India. I've got him from my wad of 500 rupee notes. There was a picture of Gandhi on the back with the nation marching on behind him. I think attitudes towards Gandhi have certainly changed perhaps in the last 20 or 30 years. But nonetheless, a figure of an object of great respect. Gandhi is known, I think, for leading the independence movement, the Indian National Congress, against British rule. But he's also famous for his efforts to reform Hindu society. Gandhi, interestingly, claimed that all of his political activity, all of his social welfare activity were based on his religious and spiritual inspiration. He says he wasn't a religious politician. He was a religious person